Do you want me to open this meeting up right now?
Yes, Madam Chair, when you are ready.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. Okay, welcome everyone to the Seldovia City Council work session of Monday, November 22nd, 1:38. This will be a City Council orientation training 2021. Go ahead, Heidi.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just figuring out my views here real quick. There we go. Okay, so this is going to be our newly elected official City Council training, as said, November 21st, 2021. And I'll be presenting, but I'm sure our wonderful city manager, Rachel, will jump in here as needed. But really want to give you guys a big welcome. This is our first ever. And as you can see, the goal is just to provide a refresher for our longstanding council members, and then some information, first-time information for our newer members, with hopefully some excellent tips, tricks, and considerations along the way. I really want to stress that if you guys have any questions during the presentation or afterwards, please let me know, because this is hopefully for everybody's benefit. I don't want to be holding these sessions if it doesn't benefit the individual council members. So feedback is much appreciated. Real quickly, our agenda, we've got, we're going to go over some rules and responsibilities. We're going to go briefly into OMA, conducting meetings, Robert's Rules of Order. We might not be able to get too in depth in that one, depending on our timing, but we can always come back to it. Or if you guys find that that's what you really want to hear about, we can make that more of the focus. Some ethics and conflicts of interest, and Seldovia Municipal Code and Finance and Budget. We're just going to touch briefly on those. Thanks for joining us, George. There's some snacks and coffee as you get settled in here. So just briefly, city history as in the budget. It talks about how we were a second-class city and then formed into a first-class city. And this says 1962, but I'll have to double check on that because, okay, 1945, we were incorporated as the first class. First-class city is governed by Title 29. Which is Alaska statute for municipal governments. I do have an older copy here, and it's at the office if anybody needs it. But the state of Alaska is no longer publishing Title 29. So if you want a more recent copy, they have that available online, and I can send you guys a link to that. But, there's the municipal code, and then there's statute, which of course we abide by as well. So it's a great resource. And then just, a note about city leadership. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. It is on the website, just talking about mayor, 6 council members. You guys are elected the first Tuesday of October. We're a city manager form of government. They are the chief executive and administrator of the city. And the city manager serves at the pleasure of the council, as well as they are the supervisor to city staff. And our meetings are scheduled on the 2nd and 4th Monday of every month at 6 p.m. in council chambers. But to get a little more in depth, so the roles of the mayor and the city council. You guys, of course, exercise legislative power for the city and the set policies by enacting ordinances. But let me see here. The city of Seldovia City Council is elected to govern. You guys are the policy makers, while city staff are the policy implementers. City managers is the staff supervisor. HR or concerns regarding staff should be discussed with and delegated to the city manager in order for them to act within their authority. The Seldovia City Council collectively supervises the city manager. And the city council exercises legislative power by setting policy through the enactment of ordinances and approval of the budget. You guys also may occasionally serve in a quasi-judicial capacity. This is more as an appeal board. For instance, if the planning commission made a decision or the city manager made a decision that affected a customer, like didn't approve a variance, for instance, and they wanted to appeal that process, it could go through the city council, and it's like you guys serve as a court, but you're not a court. So that's what they call quasi-judicial, is you guys are the appeal board that comes to you for a final decision, and hopefully not to a much larger process. But that would be quasi-judicial. You, as a council, act collectively by majority vote, as a body and not individually, while representing the entire community. And with that, I have a primer, which if you guys don't have, and Vivian, you can't see it on the screen there, but in my hands, I have a primer for city council members that the DCRA put out. Hopefully everybody received one of these in your books. If you didn't, or you just need another copy or a refresher, I do have that as a resource. You guys will approve the awards of contracts over 5,000, because that is new legislation that was just passed. Anything under 5,000, the city manager can approve, but anything over would have to go to council. And really just that you serve as community leaders, and you can serve as liaisons to various community or state organizations. For instance, Vivian, as a liaison for the salmon stocking, king salmon stocking. And we have Harmony on both council chamber, or not council chambers, Chamber of Commerce and SOS. So just representing the council as a whole on those different boards. The roles of the mayor are set in Alaska statute, which is in this Title 29, powers and duties of the mayor. And really, it's just to conduct the meeting in a fair and efficient manner, and insist on decorum and order, as well as ensuring that discussion is germane to the pending motion. Or, since we don't do motions first, discussion is germane to the topic at hand. They, typically would refrain from making motions first, often speak last in debate, may vote in case of a tie, and have veto powers, which we recently went through prior to the newly elected officials. So if you guys, we did update that code, and if you want any further information on how the veto process works, pretty much it's that the mayor can enact a veto before the next meeting after the legislation has been approved. And then from there, once it's enacted, and he has to provide a written statement of why he's vetoing. And once that's been provided, that's the exercise of the veto. From there, city council has 21 days to either, discuss or override or take any action on the veto. And any questions so far?
Yeah, so to override the veto, it's the same, it's just majority again, 4.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. It's not any different than a normal passing.
Nope, it would be a majority of 4. So, and then the mayor can also vote, like I said, vote in case of a tie, but I'd like to point out that if they do not have to, they're not required to vote. So if there is a tie and the mayor does not vote, it fails. That's by not voting, it's pretty much a no. Okay, just briefly, other staff roles and responsibilities. We have our city manager, city clerk, and finance officer, and attorney. We can go a little more in depth about each position if you need, but really basically that the city manager is the chief executive officer and administrator of the city, supervising all the city employees, hires, fires, disciplines, and sets work schedules and priorities for city employees. signs all contracts involving the city even so once the council approves, they will be the final signer, and exercises supervision and control over all city lands and other assets, proposes and administers the city budget, implements policies set by the governing body, exercises custody over all real and personal property owned by the municipality. And in the city of Seldovia, they also serve as the HR director, public works director, and many other roles not covered by staff capacity or the staff that we have at this time. City clerk, if you're not aware, I serve as the records manager. I maintain the city seal, which is what we stamp on our legislation. It is an Alaska statute that I am the election administrator. That is the role of the city clerk. Provide your support, packets, minutes, notices, and I'm your parliamentary advisor. So questions that you may have on that, we have a lot of resources to help with that. But that's big part of my position is to be able to help you guys through meetings so that they are efficient and business is able to be conducted. I also serve as the public information officer, which includes managing the website, any social media accounts, and in the times of an emergency, making sure information is out there. So in the past, just throw that out there, like when we've had power outages and, for extended periods of time, or tsunami warnings, or when information's been needed, that's really what I step into as my role, is gathering as much information as I can. And council members that have requested, I will shoot out messages to you guys. If you just want firsthand information, let me know. And as I'm shooting out information to everybody else who has requested it, you can be included. That way everybody has the same firsthand information, as well as we put it on our Facebook. In times of emergency, we don't normally put it on our website because that's a more tedious process, but we can do that afterwards behind the scene. So certainly if you're like, why is this happening? Just shoot me a message and I'll respond as I can. Our finance officer obviously is responsible for matters pertaining to the maintenance of all the finance accounts, the municipality, including accounts payable, accounts receivable, billing, utility, harbor, payroll, general entries, bank reconciliations, provides a monthly financial summary to the manager and council, helps prepare the budget and all the records for the annual audit and any special audits that might be required, as well as they're the interface with fund managers appointed by the city. And then our attorney, which as a smaller municipality, I think you should be all aware, but maybe John hasn't been caught up to speed on this. We obviously don't have a city attorney on payroll. So we contract out and currently have a contract with Levesque Law Group. And we've been with them for quite a few years. They tend to serve us pretty well, but they do bill us hourly. And really, in summary, we're all in this together. And as a very small municipality, we must work closely together to make sure that all of those tasks are accomplished. Most of us are one-person departments. Bigger organizational chart, just so you have in your mind what it looks like. It is city council, city manager, the attorney is kind of off to the side because they're a contract. And then we have 7 more departments besides what was just discussed as administration, including the harbor master's department, which has assistants in the summer, police department, safety officer, custodian, refuse, and staff for the AMHS. Pretty much all of those besides maintenance and public works and harbor master's office are, like I said, one-person departments. So one person taking on a lot of tasks. And while fire and EMS department falls under the city of Seldovia, that department is also regulated by the volunteer board that acts outside of the city manager's oversight. And if there are questions, oh wait, hold on, I want to say also additionally, the city manages the Sea Otter Community Center through a memorandum of agreement with the Kenai Peninsula Borough. And the SOC also has their own board, the Seldovia Recreational Service Area Board, who oversees their area and its budget. And just in the structure, it's nice to keep in mind. So we have so you can see the city council, mayor, city manager, and then everybody underneath. And really that's how a city manager government is set up. So as city council members, you guys supervise the city manager collectively. And then for staff management, that goes to the city manager for her to delegate. And so like requests, anything that goes to, that you guys want from city staff, which is, of course, that's going to come up. So just including the city manager in that process, because she's the one that has the authority to delegate to the staff what we're doing. Questions so far? This is when that was kind of a basic overview. We're gonna get a little bit more into it now. So just gonna start off with OMA, email, special media, and public records. You all have a city council, a city email account. So we conduct business regularly through that, including sending out agenda notices, packets, any upcoming pending business. So please conduct any official business through that account. All emails are subject to public disclosure. If you don't know that yet, I hope you do. If it's in an email, I was taught once at a training in the very beginning, or I was told, if you put it in writing, make sure you're prepared to have it in the front page news. So that's a great reminder of, like, if it's in writing, anybody can request it. There are a couple of exceptions, of course, like city attorney, client privilege, the few things that are confidential that deal with minors and police and such, but pretty much everything else, if it's in writing, it is open to public disclosure, which we have a nice form at the city office where people can ask for that record, and they can say, I want all emails pertaining to the subject, or, however it works, or whatever they're looking for, and we have to disclose those. So on that note, please don't delete emails. I know we've all seen the news where that's been a scandal. So and you do not have to respond to every email addressed to you. So just because somebody sends you an email doesn't mean you have to respond, but you can forward it to our office if you want, or, have staff respond if you'd like, or just to be aware of what's happening. When you do respond, of course, be professional, use email etiquette. And we covered don't delete them. We have in our code, which you should all have our code book, a public records law, which is also covered by the state and federally through the Freedom of Information Act. So it's a pretty big deal. Social media. Okay, before that, we have text messages. Please refrain from texting during meetings. Messages on your phone, if you're texting during a meeting, are part of the meeting. So that can also be open and available for public disclosure. And we can ask for those records, or a court can come in and ask for those records. So it's always a great idea to turn off your cell phone, silence it. You're going to get messages. I think probably a few people get messages from the public. It's better to just, ignore them. And messages can be directed in person, over the phone, or through Zoom. So there is opportunity for the public to participate. But if you open up your phone and you're using it to communicate with the public, that's potentially a record, or it is a record. And with social media also, business conducted on social media by a city representative can be considered a public record. And that's why we have a website, a Facebook page, and we pay to have our Facebook page archived so that we have those records. And if somebody comes in and wants to put in a public records request, they can have access to that. So anything that's put on that page is available for the public. That's also why, and it's come up in the past a lot, but I think people are really starting to figure it out. That's why we do not post on Chatterbox or any other private pages as city representatives in the city office, because we don't have access to that account to archive or keep those records. So anything we put out as a city official is a city record. And if we keep it on our page, then we can track it. However, the public can take that post and share it. And once it's shared, Joe Smith comes in and he shares whatever the city of Seldovia shared, then it becomes his record. We don't have to track it. But if it comes from a city official, it's still a city record. For your personal pages, there's a gray line there. That's really, I was told when this came up recently, if your if your Facebook, your personal page is all city business, if you're sharing city business over and over again, or putting up, the city's doing this, you got to watch out, because that makes it a city page. However, as an individual citizen, if you're saying, hey, they're doing this, we're going here, whatever it is that you can put out information, you can share information as an individual, but you have to make sure you're not crossing that line as a representative of the city. Does that make sense? Anybody got any questions on that?
Well, City Clerk,
Yes.
I was hoping you could go over the Open Meetings Act and, like say you have a council member passionate about one topic, how they can
Yes.
share that information and how many council members can be meeting
Yes.
on a particular topic.
We're going to get there.
Perfect.
Okay. Oh, and please do not, if you post something on social media and say, as a city council member, as a representative of the city of Soldovia, that automatically makes it a record. So if anybody sees that, let me know, because I need to capture that. That's really, it's not that we don't want to share information. It's not that we don't want to be available to people. It's just that on the other side of it, the public has the right to know what's being shared. So we have to capture that. And it's much easier just to do it on the city page. Okay, Open Meetings Act. Woo. Any questions before we get a little further? On social media, texting? Okay. So Open Meetings Act, State of Alaska Statute 4462-310. I'm not going to read that all out to you. But just the basics. Meetings of the governmental body are open to the public. And that means that we have to provide notice for all meetings of the public, or all meetings of the governmental body, except there's a few exceptions, and we'll get into those. Soldovia Municipal Code also touches on that in Title II, Chapter 4, Section 040. Says that our notice, as long as the majority of the members are present, can be given in 24 hours oral or written notice, as long as reasonable efforts are made to notify all the members. But we're going to go a little bit further into that. Everybody's kind of had a time to look over it. So municipal officials and city officials, it's not just, council, but city staff as well, can sometimes assume that 24 hours notice or oral notice is sufficient because that's what it says in our code. But according to court and legal, that might not be the case, because if it's a more substantial issue, more notice may be required. 24-hour notice just really doesn't cut the bill. Depending on, there's always going to be special circumstances, short timelines, emergencies that come up. But really, for reasonable notice, it needs to be consistent. Let's see here. And we should be sticking with the same general time that notice is put out. So for us, we put out notice 5 days prior to a meeting. That's our goal. I was always to put it out 5 days. There have been the very, very few occasions where it's been 4 days prior. But 5 days is the general marker, so that we make sure that we have reasonable notice. Oh, sorry, this is going slow here. And on that agenda, we need to make sure to put, let me just look here. Not only do we put out notice every 5 days, but we also post it at the city office, post office, the multipurpose building, and the website. And those need to stay consistent as well, because if they look for it there one time and seeing it, they need to be able to find it every time. It's presumably if notice is provided in an inconsistent manner, the public may become confused about how to find out about meetings of the body, and the court may find such notice to be unreasonable. Let's see here. The question of whether a matter to be considered must be listed. Apparently, it says the court's reasonable notice standard requires that some important, complex, or controversial issues must be specifically identified in the advance notice of the meeting and listed on the agenda, which also means 24 hours wouldn't cut it. And that notice should be provided to specific individuals whose rights are at stake and the issue to be considered. So if you're discussing a leasee option, or, you know, an individual that has a specific stake, you want to make sure that not only do they have the 5-day notice, but they've had a reasonable notice for them to be able to attend. And that also includes executive sessions, which we'll go and get into here in a little bit more. But if a meeting, let's see here. For executive sessions, there is a special requirement that if it is for a subject that may tend to prejudice the reputation and character of a person, then they have the option to require the discussion to be held in public. So they not only do they need notice, but they can also say, hey, I don't want you guys to have some executive session. You need to have it in the public. So that's an extra requirement that's required.
Can I add a couple things to this too?
Yes.
So when I got here, something else that we also put into effect was a tentative agenda. And so that comes out the week before the actual agenda and the packet hit the public. The idea is that if council members individually have items that they also want included on the agenda for consideration, it gives you time to see what we currently have in place. And then you would meet with either myself or the mayor to talk about specific items you think the council as a body should consider. So you have your tentative agenda that comes out the week before the actual agenda and packet. And I think the overall hope for doing that is to improve public transparency with our discussion, you know, give the public enough heads up. Hey, like we're thinking during the council meeting, we're going to be talking about these specific topics. Just gives people enough time to plan to attend. And so by having these really stringent requirements for the packet and the agenda, we're trying to inform the community as much as possible within our capacity that we're going to be having conversations on this topic.
Yes. And then lastly, so if a meeting is being held by teleconference, which is video, by the way, a teleconference meeting is either video or telephonic. So those both constitute virtual meetings, constitute a teleconference meeting. So in that, the meeting notice must state the location of any teleconferencing facilities. And that means that if there's a remote location being used, the public may gather and participate, you know, that location so that the public can gather there. Or if virtual only, then the Zoom or whatever meeting platform URL. Okay. Am I keeping you guys all? It's like a snoozer so far. Conducting meetings. Huh? Any questions? Okay, any questions online? Okay. So I'm just gonna switch gears a little bit. There's a lot more about OMA, and as Rachel's already alluded to about, you know, emails and social media and gathering together. So we'll get a little bit more into that as we go through conducting meetings, I believe. If we don't, then I'll go back to it. But so meeting is 4 or more members of the body, whichever, or a majority, whichever is less. And any meeting with a quorum where council is accessing information that might influence any action you may take, the public has a right to know where you're getting that information from. So with that in mind, meetings, it is recommended that no more than 2 members attend any one single event unless the public is properly noticed, so that you don't accidentally hold a meeting. But typically meetings are prearranged for the purpose of considering a matter upon which the body is empowered to act. Chance encounters by members may not constitute a meeting. If you were at a restaurant and, two other council members are at a restaurant eating, it's not prearranged, that may not be a meeting. Gatherings for some other purpose than the business of the body are likewise not meetings as defined by MOMA. So if the school's holding a concert, you go to the concert, the whole council is at the concert. It's not a gathering of the body. You guys aren't conducting business. You're not talking. That's not a meeting. However, convening a social gathering for the hidden purpose of conducting the body's business would be viewed as subterfuge, and a court may conclude that a social gathering is in fact a prearranged meeting held in violation of the OMA. So if you're like, oh, we're gonna go have tea time at so-and-so's house or play cards or whatever it is, and you have a quorum of council members and you guys happen to talk about business at that meeting, and you start doing that regularly to be able to talk about business, that court would not like that.
Does the mayor count into any of those 4? Where does the mayor fit into that?
Oh, as the quorum? That's a great question, because he's technically not a part of the court. He's not a voting member.
Not that I'm going to hold these secret meetings, but I just wonder that.
No, that's a great question. Let me check into that. Actually, I haven't. I'll get back to you on that. But typically, even with the mayor, don't gather as we say 2 or we say more than 2, because that's your safety net. If 2 people happen to be there, that's great. 3 people happen to be there. Oh, you might have to start worrying. 4 people.
Hey, Heidi.
You have a quorum. Yes, Harmony.
Hey, sorry to cut across you there.
No.
So I asked this in the recent newly
AMO?
elected officials training. Thank you. Anyways, so we live in a super small community. I work for somebody who recently became a council member. We do not discuss business at work. But if another council member were to come in, this has happened twice now since John Kennedy has become a new council member, that a third council member has come on the premises while I'm working and he's working. But at these times, we have never joined in a discussion as council members, and in fact have never interacted as a threesome, but just for like peace of mind, where I'm getting at with this. I feel like everything I've read and seen kind of excludes us, as we're safe in that way because of our circumstances, such a small town.
So you're not prearranged, right? You guys aren't gathering at the same time every week to discuss city business. The gatherings are happening for a purpose other than the business of body. It's not technically a gathering even, because everybody's there on their own individual business. And you're not, like I said, you're not convening a social gathering in order to have a hidden meeting of conducting business. So no, according to what I've learned so far from OMA, you guys are good. It's that prearranged is a big part of it. And that I had a great training this week, and I'm trying to remember how it was a different municipal attorney was there, and she put it really eloquently with OMA. She said, the court is not out. They're not out to have a gotcha moment. They don't, they're not trying to catch council and or assemblies or bodies and get them in trouble for OMA. They're not out there to get you. It's the intent that really matters. That's what really they're looking for. And that you guys aren't doing any trickery. You're not having anything hidden that's happening underneath. Everything's on the level and out there. And there are going to be times, like you go to the Christmas program, there are going to be times where there are going to be more than 2 or 3 council members in a building. But really just keeping that in mind, that you are not there intentionally that it's not a prearranged business of the body, and, that's not to conduct business. And you should be pretty good.
And to add to that too, it's like to assure the public that you guys haven't already made a decision before meeting, because you serve the public. And so you want the public to have confidence that you guys are having conversations openly and doing decision-making openly, so that the public can still add their comments and possibly even influence your decision, your conversation from hearing from your constituents. So it's overall too, just to ensure that the public knows you're being transparent, honest. So Open Meetings Act also involves taking a topic and going to council members. So you don't want to lobby the body to vote a certain way about your particular topic or interest. You want to do that as a body. So you don't want to be a lobbyist for your own cause with the body. That's also very important too.
Yeah, and we're going to get a little bit more into that. So just as it says, staff meetings and executive sessions are not considered open meetings. An executive session, there'll be a slide on it later, but basically, I hope you guys probably have a little bit of understanding on it, but we can go more in depth if we need. They do have to convene in an open meeting. So you have to make a motion inside of a meeting to go into executive session, and then that will close the meeting. But there are specific purposes in order to make an executive session, and then you have to come back out of it in an open meeting. There are specific rules about that. And then staff meetings are not considered open meetings. So I said that. But what Rachel was alluding to earlier, serial meetings, poll meetings, and meetings within meetings can be considered an open meeting and can violate OMA. And really that's a serial or a poll calling council member meeting, or a poll calling meeting would be like, for instance, if a council member called one council member after another to ask what their thoughts on an item would be. Hey, what are you gonna vote on whatever the item is? Or I don't think you should vote that way. Or will you support me in my thought on that? Because as Rachel was saying, that's the whole importance of OMA, is for that public trust and that they're a part of the decision-making process. If you guys show up at a meeting with a decision made and the public doesn't know how you got there, that's a big red flag that is being violated, that OMA is being violated. The other instance that can happen very easily in is serial or group emails. So same thing, if you're emailing each council member and then those council members are emailing you back and everybody has this information that the public doesn't have, it's happening outside of the purview of the public, that violates OMA. A lot of times, staff sends out emails and calls pertaining to administrative tasks. Like I might call all 5 of you and say, are you available next Tuesday for a work session at 5 p.m. Items such as meeting times and verifying schedule availabilities are permitted, and you'll see an emails that we send out with those kind of items, or any item that's sent out by staff, we BCC. That's a great tool, because that is where I've heard a lot of communities have struggled, is even a staff person will send out an email. Are you available for this? Somebody hits reply all, and so then it goes back to everybody. I am, but I need more information, or yada, yada, yada about, I don't like this topic. I'm available, but I don't want to discuss this. And then you get more responses. That's a meeting. So that's why we BCC. Additionally, a private recess during a meeting may itself be a meeting. Recesses, of course, are allowed. Go to the bathroom. We can even take a recess if there's a really complex amendment to a motion and you just need a moment to be able to write it down. But we have to watch out in those recesses that business isn't being conducted, that the public's missing out on, especially in the age of the virtual age now, where people are not all in the same room, in the same place. But not to be scary, if this happens, OMA violations have occurred all across the state, I'm sure, and nation, and it can happen, and it can happen without you intending it to happen. We try to set everybody up so that it doesn't happen, but if it does, you can remedy it. We, in the past, the city council had an executive session. There shouldn't have been an executive session, or wasn't an executive session for the right reason. Same thing with OMA. If this happens, it's called a cure. You come out in a public meeting and you say, hey, I want to discuss this. I want to say, I was at a concert and me and these other 4 council members, 3 council members, got to talking, and then we walked over and we looked at this issue, and then we were talking, and you just let that known to the public, and that's your remedy. It's possible to remedy and cure violations of OMA. Any questions?
Heidi, if I may.
Yes.
Yeah, for clarification, in Seldovia, because we are so small, just to clarify, if there's 2 council members who are talking on a street corner, just having a conversation, not maybe even talking about city business, and if a 3rd council member shows up, that alone doesn't look good to the public. So that's where you have to say, oh, we're 3 of us here, we need to go our separate ways. That's what I do. That's what I believe. And correct me if I'm wrong, if that is something that we need to be that clear about. And the other part is that as a council member, every now and then, maybe after a meeting or before a meeting, you're wondering what another council member, not polling all the council members, but a council member. If you call that person and say, what are your feelings, or where do you stand on this issue, or help me understand something about this, where does that stand as far as Open Meetings Act?
Right. So those are great examples. I think, yeah, we are a small community. You guys are going to have times where you're standing on the corner or you're at the local restaurant. Conversations are going to come up. Really, OMA, like I said, it's not out there for a gotcha moment, but that is what you want to keep in the back of your mind, is that you're holding the public's trust in your hand. And how's that going to look to the public? Are you violating it with 3 members standing on a street corner and city business happens to come up? Maybe not. But does it look good to the public? Definitely, probably not. So keeping that in mind, I would say that's a great practice. But again, small community, we are going to have times where individuals are in the same area, can't avoid each other all the time, right? And then secondly, you were asking about calling an individual council member. No, I'd say if you're not calling every single council member to ask them the same questions and get their opinions and discuss your opinion, I mean, there you may want information that goes a little deeper, that delves more into it. But a great way to handle that is when you have a meeting, and I've heard the mayor say it, I've heard other people say it, in that meeting, you say, hey, so I was talking to John the other day, and this is what we discussed. And that's a great way to cover your basis. And say, we had this conversation. I called George, and this is what we said. Short, sweet, to the point.
And Councilmember Rojas, just to add to that too, this is where a city manager could also be of assistance, because staff meetings aren't a violation of Open Meetings Act. So if you come to me and talk about a particular topic and I have a general sense, I'm not going to disclose the privacy or confidence of things that other individual council members have shared with me. But if you're looking for a temperature check or just guidance, this is where the city manager could assist individual council members to help you not violate the Open Meetings Act, but give you a sense of particular policy or legislative issues as well.
Great, thank you.
You bet.
That's great. Any more questions on this topic? I know it can be a little daunting. No? Okay. And if anything comes up, definitely let me know. Give me a call. So meetings, we've already discussed what constitutes an open meeting, what we have regular meetings, special meetings. We just recently discussed committee of the whole, so maybe we'll see that come in the future, and work sessions. I won't dive deep into that unless anybody has any question on any of those. And then we have a regular meeting schedule, as said, second and fourth Monday of every month. March and December, I would like to point out, only have one meeting scheduled each month due to a holiday following on the second meeting. So you have a calendar. George, I don't think you got one yet, but it's right here. I made a beautiful colored one. Vivian, I'll send you and Harmony, I'll email you both this lovely colored calendar that you guys can keep for the year. And it's in your packet as well, that along with the meeting resolution that's passed for FY22, or not FY22, calendar year. We do it on calendar year because it's the meetings for the calendar year, not for the fiscal year. That would be complicated. And then we're going to go into, and we're going to take a break here in a few minutes, but basic principles of meetings. Like we just discussed, a quorum is required in order to have a meeting. So that's 4. And we'll discuss some of these a little bit more in depth, but this is just a basic overview of a meeting. You have to have a quorum of 4 present to act. No action shall be valid unless adopted by an affirm vote of 4 or more members. We do roll call votes for all votes that are taken during hybrid meetings. That way, again, for that public trust and for the public record. If you are all in one room together sitting and you want to do a vote of no objection, just nobody say anything, that's how we used to run the votes for the meeting and for the minutes. But because everybody is potentially in different rooms, different areas, including the public, roll call votes has come into play so that everybody knows what you're voting. Really just come prepared with your thoughts collected, and all your comments should be directed through the chair. The mayor runs the meeting, and often you'll hear us say as staff through the mayor, through the chair, because there shouldn't be this back and forth, especially between the public and council and, staff and public and staff and council. Really everything he, as the mayor, that's part of his role, right? That he gets to direct the conversation and who's speaking next, and making sure that decorum is taking place. So that's important, that we're not getting into a lot of back and forth between members and or any individuals, but that it still goes through that chair. Really a big thing in Robert's rules is there's a speak once rule, speak once and wait. And that's an essence of Robert rules, that everybody is supposed to have the opportunity to speak. So if you speak once and let everybody else have a chance and then speak again. Another part of Robert's rules, which isn't always conducive to business, is that speaking only twice. So if you come with your thoughts prepared, you speak once, everybody talks, you have something else to say, you speak again, and then you're done. Obviously things come up. Sometimes there's more that needs to be said. That's just a general decorum tidbit. Refraining from sidebar conversation, that can be really distracting, especially with the new mics on. So your mic might not be on, but you're having a conversation and somebody else's mic's on and they are trying to talk, or somebody on the screen's trying to talk. It's not only distracting, but it can make it difficult for the public to know what's occurring in the open meeting itself, or when they're seeing it in the room and they don't know what's being said. That can be really frustrating. And of course, practicing patient, being open to compromise, and only having one question, meaning one motion to be considered at a time. This would be more pertinent if we had motions first. And maybe that'll come up to play. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the future and eventually, but right now it's really discussion and then a motion. So we can.
Hey, Heidi.
Yes.
I know that I've specifically spoken to you about this before, but I hear it come up pretty often in talking with the public, especially in a community like ours. We're so small and we all like to have a voice in the conversation. Mm-hmm. Are you going to cover the public to council order, like the discussion order? So like in Saldovia, we allow the public to speak after every topic, but that's not always the case.
Yes, absolutely.
Elsewhere.
We're going to cover that.
Excellent. Thank you.
No problem. So being able to have that free discussion of a motion is every member's right. So even though we have a discussion first and then a motion, it's your right to be able to just talk after the motion, whether you like it or you don't like it. Often there isn't anything for anybody to say because you've already said it. You don't need to repeat it. But if you want, that would be the order if you went to another community's meeting, potentially that would be more of the order, is that they would have a motion, and then it's your right to be able to speak again and say your thoughts for or against it. Parliamentary procedure, and we're going to get even more in depth in it, but it really exists to facilitate the transaction of business and promote cooperation and harmony. And it's, again, another great reminder that, you're acting as a whole and not individually. So the majority wins. Agenda, I did provide an agenda example with comments on it, but I feel like you guys pretty much have seen it. But I didn't want to leave it out just in case somebody did have a question specific to the agenda. And it sounds like Harmony did have a question on the order of discussion. That's going to come up on a slide here next, but really, we already discussed, I prepared the agenda. The tentative agenda, as Rachel said, goes out a week and a half prior to the meeting. That's your guys' chance to say, hey, I want this on the agenda. I don't want this on the agenda. That, of course, has to go through the mayor and the city manager to approve of the changes to the agenda. And then that agenda is set on Wednesday or 5 days prior to the meeting.
So if we decide that we don't want to discuss the topic,
Yes.
and we take it off the agenda, do you have to disclose reasons to the public why you decided not to talk about it?
So, no. What would you? I meant to start this meeting by saying a really huge thank you to you guys and to the city manager for allowing me to continue my training and education. I don't know if you guys know this, but I came back yesterday from a week-long training in Anchorage. It was amazing. We covered OMA, and part of that being that the agenda, once it's set, shouldn't be amended at the meeting. So our code says 24-hour notice. We set the agenda on Wednesday. An amendment comes up Thursday or Friday. We could amend the agenda, get that back out to the public to fall within the 24-hour notice, right? We have an amended agenda. Monday hits, there's a meeting, you want to amend the agenda. That is not giving reasonable notice to the public. So we're going to discuss that a little bit more in the future. I didn't mean to bring it up today, but that's a great question. We're going to discuss that a little bit more in the future, but saying that if you don't want to discuss something on that agenda, that's a great reason to have the motion first, because you can move to postpone indefinitely. Somebody agrees with that? I'll have to double check if that's one where you debate or not. I don't think you do. No, you do. That one's when you can debate. It's voted on, it's approved, it's done. You don't have to discuss it. Or if you're not ready to discuss it at that meeting, you move to postpone until the next meeting. Then you bring it up then. And you can keep doing that, moving to postpone until the next meeting, as long as you need, as long as it's not defeating the purpose of the legislation. And it just keeps going under unfinished business. So there are protocols. If something comes up and you all of a sudden do not want to discuss that, absolutely use those motions, postpone indefinitely, postpone till time. And the other option is you don't say anything. You don't say anything. Nobody makes a motion. It's dead.
Right. But what about on the tentative? Before it's published, can you take stuff off?
Yes.
Do we have to explain that to anybody?
Well, it's on the tentative agenda, and I'll double check how it's worded, but the tentative agenda, that's the point, is that it's tentative. It's not set. And that gives the public and the council an idea of what's upcoming. And if it changes, that can change. But our reasonable notice, we're providing extra reasonable notice, because we're saying a week and a half, this is tentative, what we're going to discuss. And then a week before, you're saying, this is what we're going to discuss.
Okay.
And then, like I said, there is a little bit of leeway there. We don't want that to be a regular habit, but sometimes things come up that are super time sensitive to be like, oh, wait, we have time. We're going to amend the agenda. But if something comes up on Monday, we should be holding a special meeting.
And city clerk, just to add to that too, I haven't actually seen individual council members being able to do that in terms of removing things from a tentative agenda or an agenda in general, because that could be seen as censorship. So if you as a council member every single time was like, we don't need to talk about this, I don't want to talk about this, it actually takes 4 of you to make an action. So another way that you could address it is, say there's a piece of legislation that you don't agree with, you could always direct or ask the city manager, work with me to give a substitute resolution, work with me to create an amendment for this legislation. But there's, I guess, that fine line between censoring the will of the body by saying, I want to take this item off, especially if it's an administrative thing or something that the collective body's been working towards. There's a difference of doing it that versus coming up with your own version, how you'd like to see it presented. And then, of course, as the city clerk said, if you're not personally ready to have the discussion, you could even announce that at the meeting, I need more time. I've seen this body being very willing to delay a decision because a sponsor wasn't able to attend the meeting. More information was needed. So you can always move to postpone.
Okay.
Or, like I said, don't do anything. If you don't do anything, it's dead. And that sounds scary. That I think that was intimidating to me when I started. So hopefully we don't let that be intimidating to you guys, because something dies on the table if you don't make a motion towards it, if you don't vote on it, or it's postponed indefinitely. It is your guys' rights as council members to be able to put forth legislation. And you wouldn't want to, you wouldn't want to do it to a point that other city councils have it in their policies. I'm trying to think of what the right word is, but to the point where it's, it's just like unnecessary and silly. You wouldn't say, okay, I really want this legislation, so I'm going to put it forth. Nobody is going to act on it. Put it forth. There's a reasonable amount of time to put forth legislation. But if something comes forward, you're not ready to act on it, it dies, it's postponed indefinitely. And you want to bring it back at the next meeting or 4 meetings later, you find more information, you want to provide more information, that's your right as a council member to be able to put that back forth. So just that terminology, I think, at least for me, was intimidating. It's postponed indefinitely. It's dead on the table. It's your right to be able to bring it back if you want. Okay, and that leads really into that the mayor, council member, city clerk, city attorney, or city manager may sponsor an ordinance for introduction or resolution for adoption, or request a discussion item to be placed on the agenda. That's your guys' right. The agenda does go through the city manager and mayor for approval. And, just a big part of that is really because if we need to provide more additional information, generally, if you're putting forth a resolution or an ordinance, it needs backup material, or there's more information, even to write it. Or if you have an agenda that's already got 7 items on it, there might be a delay. Like, can we put this off? The city manager or the mayor, or even myself might say, can we put this off until the next meeting? And that's not to take away your right. Hopefully, that's not the goal. It's just that's our job as city staff, is to help you guys run an efficient meeting. And you guys have definitely seen those stacked agendas. So however we can make and support you guys best, not to lessen your guys' topic or make it, it doesn't mean less. It's just that we do keep a long list of ongoing legislation. And so how do we fit it in so that it's the most effective? And how involved and how much do you want to own it? Because if you want to write your own resolution or ordinance and then just have staff review and go over it, that's amazing. But it does take more time if staff's writing it, which is our job and we're willing and welcoming to do, but it just can take time. Okay, let's see here. I did provide the agenda example. We did talk about virtual roll call. Our agenda, the last thing I really want to touch on is the order of business. The agenda, reason it looks the way it looks is because it's in the municipal code. There's potentially some revisions that are going to happen in the near future. And if we're going to do that, it has to go through the ordinance process, the ordinance introduction to the two meeting reading, right? And part of what Harmony was asking is that on our meetings, and it's going to come up, I keep saying these things are going to come up in the later, you will see our public hearing business. So it's presentation by staff, council discussion, public presentation, action disposition, and that is backwards. We are backwards. It's called a custom rule. And let me see if it's on the next slide or not. Nope, it just goes into a lay down, which you are probably familiar with by now. We try not to have a lot of laydowns or supplemental information because that's information coming to you after the packet. Really, the goal is for you and for the public to have that information out and enough time to be able to read and, assimilate that information and find additional information that you need. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. And sometimes things do come in last minute. That's when a laydown is provided, or if information isn't able to be given in a timely manner, considering our limited capacity. Supplemental information really is more of that additional information. If somebody walks in to provide a board report or gives a presentation and they provide you with information that the staff didn't have prior to that, then that's my job. I'm going to grab that information and I'm going to put it up on the web for the public and council and anybody who wants to see. And then consent agenda really is, we're hopefully that'll be part of our discussion for amending the agenda in the future. But the consent agenda is a lot of councils, a lot of assemblies and places hold a consent agenda because it does make a meeting more efficient. Those regular housekeeping items, those everyday items that come up once a year, come up every so often, that you don't want to have a lot of discussion on, that that you're in support of. Even for instance, like our meeting calendar resolution, we haven't put resolutions on the consent agenda yet. But if we know that every year we're going to have a meeting resolution, the meetings are already put in code on the second and fourth Monday, so they're already there. You don't need to have a lot of discussion on it. That might be an amendment in the future to the consent agenda, is to allow for more legislation like the resolution. And of course, it's always your right as a council member to take that legislation off. I want to talk about these meetings. I want to talk about this meeting resolution. I want to talk about this ordinance introduction. You can take it off. It'll be discussed under new business or public hearing. It'll be the first, it can be the first item discussed. We haven't had a lot of it, so we'll have to work on that procedure as council, or we can also put it in a different format that shows it in its place. That way, if it's removed, it's there. But meetings that are generally long, just because it is allowing for that back and forth on every item, when all you're going to say is, I support this. Yes, this is housekeeping. We've heard that. Yes, this is housekeeping. I support it. And there isn't a big public presence for it. Those items could be put on there as well.
So when you want to remove something from that to discuss it, you just ask in the meeting when it's presented.
Yeah, for under consent agenda, the mayor will ask, just as it says, a council member may request to remove any item for discussion in a separate vote, and he'll ask, does anybody want to remove an item for this?
And all it takes is
discussion?
someone to say yes, we don't need to vote or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, then it just, because it's your guys' right to discuss it.
Right.
This is just, this is a tool. This is a tool for you guys to be able to perform a better meeting,
Right.
a faster meeting. But if there's something you want to discuss, please remove it. And if you have a small tidbit like, hey, city clerk, there's a typo on page 4 of the minutes, yada, 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 that can happen under the consent agenda. It's just when you start having a lot larger conversation that it will defeat the purpose of the consent agenda and you want to remove it.
And then, so city clerk, you're saying that some at a later point in the presentation, there'll be the custom.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
Yep, it's coming along.
And then I just wanted to ask the council, do you guys feel comfortable understanding the difference between a resolution and an ordinance? Oh, perfect. Head of the game here. I love it.
Okay, so public presentation during a meeting. 2 public comment periods, opportunities at the beginning of the meeting. One for presentation prior notice, which is a little bit longer, that's 10 minutes, but that's allowed. They've given prior notice and it's on the agenda. And one for presentation for items not on the agenda. That's limited to 3 minutes each. And really, if one member is getting 3 minutes and the next member and the next member and the next member, the mayor always has the right to extend that. But if he's extending it for one person, it's keeping it in mind that, you know, you are extending, you know, you should be giving everybody the same, you know, consistency. So same ruling. And Soldovia is pretty loose. I don't know that I've had very many opportunities or had times where I had to set a timer. We could if we had to. But generally, as a small community, everybody gets a chance to speak, and we want to encourage that. Under OMA, the public has the right to be present, to listen, and to review materials. So they have a right to see everything that's on these tables. There needs to be implied reasonable opportunity to attend. If it's not reasonable, you know, for instance, you can't hold a meeting in Halibut Cove. You know, you can't hold a meeting unless you're providing everybody an opportunity to get there. It needs to be reasonable accommodations. And the public is also able to speak under routine business. This is where we're going to get into that conversation, Harmony. Oh, darn. Okay. What about under attendees? There she is. Okay. During work sessions or committees of the whole. So Soldovia has a lot of public presentation. A lot of public participation. We do not have to have public participation under new business, unfinished business, under items that are just discussion for the city council that are not a public hearing item. If you're passing a piece of legislation, an ordinance, a resolution, sure, have the public, you know, that's required. They have the right to be heard. They have to be allowed to speak. But that's a lot of why there's that public presentation for items not on the agenda and public presentation prior notice. Soldovia just in general is really encouraging. I've heard council members say over and over again, we want the public to come, we want them to speak, but it's not necessary, nor find that slide. Maybe I won't because we can go into break. It's not necessary, nor does the council, nor are you guys required to speak back to somebody in the public who's speaking. That's a great reason why the conversation goes through the chair, especially if something's heated, it's controversial, somebody's asking a question, they're really upset, you're upset, whatever is happening. That's everybody's opportunity to speak, but it doesn't have to flow as a conversation. They have their chance. They get to say what they want to say. That's their right. You guys listen. That's, you know, the right of the public for you guys to listen. It's your right to be able to speak and say how you feel. But there's never that if somebody asks a question, especially if you don't know it right then, you don't have to respond. Or you can say, staff will get back to you. That's a great one. And we're almost to a break. So executive sessions, we already kind of discussed that this is the one that doesn't need an open meeting, but it has to be convened in an open meeting. It has to have a quorum in order to go into executive session. So 4 members need to vote in the affirmative in order for it to be an executive session. And Alaska statute is pretty clear on what constitutes an executive session. I really wanted to put this in here because I've had it come up, like I've heard, we should have that in executive session. We should have that, people have asked, or when does it constitute an executive session? And I have heard from our legal many times and from other people that really not a lot should be an executive session. But the four main ones are matters, the immediate knowledge of which would clearly have an adverse effect upon the finances of the corporation. So even if it's like contract negotiations, lease negotiations, things that, you want to be able to discuss what you're going to offer or what you're going to accept without getting it out there because it would potentially ruin negotiations. Unless the person has requested to discussed in public subjects that tend to prejudice the reputation and character of a person. So that would be the case of your city manager, contract review, really not a whole lot else because a lot of those discussions should go through the city manager when it comes to other people and individuals of the community. But that or interviews, we've seen it happen in interviews too, or contract negotiations after an interview, right? When you're going to offer them the job, how much are they going to accept? That person has the right to say, no, you held it in the public. And I think I already said that, but I'm making sure you guys know it again. Matters that by law or municipal charter or ordinance are permitted to be kept confidential from public disclosure. I've been told there is not a lot that falls under that. That's not one that's normally used, or matters pertaining to personnel. Really, it's going to be the top two. Those are the ones that you're going to see. Pretty much everything else, sometimes it's kind of scary. Sometimes we might not want to say it or say how we feel or what we're thinking and how we're coming to it. But the public, for the most part, has the right to hear it. Of course, this goes just a little bit further into it. So like we said, contract negotiation strategies, settlement discussions for litigation, attorney-client privilege, that's the third, that's a really big one. We discussed prejudice or reputation of character, and we also discussed that these have to be convened in a public meeting, and that motion must be very clear. So as staff, we can provide script cards. We've done that before, if that helps. It says, this is the reason you have to, two things. This is the reason we're going into executive session, and this is why. So it would be, we're going into executive session to discuss or contract negotiation with the city manager. And the reason why would be for the immediate knowledge of which would clearly have an adverse effect upon the finances of the corporation. Or we're going in to have a review of the city manager's contract, the meeting of which would be subject to prejudice the reputation and character of the person, except that they have the right to request to have it in public. Any questions on executive session? I will point out, we have a motion to go into executive session. That's required. We do not have to move out of executive session. The mayor can just reconvene that meeting. But for the minutes and the public, I think it looks better just to have that in and out, and it ties it up. Okay. Any questions before we take a quick 5-minute break, get a refill on coffee and donuts? We're feeling good? Okay. Madam Chair, are you okay if we take a quick 5-minute recess so everybody can have a little breather, walk around, get a sip of water?
You bet. Let's take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Okay. Madam Chair, are we ready? Or Madam Clerk, rather.
Yes, Madam Chair, we are, I believe we're ready. Are we ready, everybody?
Okay, we'll bring
Okay.
the special meeting to order at 4:01 p.m.
Let's see here. So I'm just gonna share again. My thing is it's 3:01 Alaska time.
Oh, sorry.
We know what we're saying.
That's right. Thank you.
I think you have to double click to enter the full screen mode there. Okay. Oop. And sorry, I'm trying to get back to my view. Oh my gosh, let's see here. Rachel, how do I get it back to my presenter view?
Is there anything here?
Oh yeah, that's how I did it last time. That's right. Okay. Sorry, this is my first real PowerPoint presentation, if you believe that or not. So we're gonna start back from our break a little bit more on parliamentary procedure. And some of this we might go through fairly quickly because there's a lot to it, and I don't want to take up the whole rest of the meeting on this topic, specifically on Robert's rules. But if you guys are finding it really valuable, then we can slow down and take it a little bit more easily. But Yes, according to Seldovia Municipal Code, Robert's Rules of Order is the parliamentary authority that's been adopted. Municipal clerk, as stated before, is the parliamentary advisor. It's the reason for having parliamentary authority is, of course, to have facilitate a more effective meeting. It's a guideline that enables the group to really conduct business with speed and efficiency. It protects the rights of the individual and to maintain harmony within the group so that hopefully we can get home before 10. In extreme cases, the city clerk may ask for an at ease or recess in order to refer to Robert's rules. Something I just recently learned that I think could be highly effective, because we've had a few times, thankfully not very often, where we need to look back at the rule book and being able to have that at ease or recess to make sure that we're following it is really helpful. Speaking of rule books, I have in front of me this one that comes really highly recommended by a lot of municipalities and assemblies. And in fact, I just had a parliamentary procedure training on Friday. And again, it was brought up, really highly recommended. The Idiot's Complete Guide to Robert Rules. So if anybody wants access to it, lays it out more in layman's terms of what Robert's Rules is and why. And so we'd be happy to purchase that for you. If the city council any members would like that, just let me know. I'll make sure you get a copy. Otherwise, we do have 2 books of the 11th edition. This is the most recent, Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised. There's one that always stays in council chambers and one that's mine, my office, along with Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief. So we have both of those here in chambers and at the city clerk's office if the council wants to check them out. And let me know if you want the Idiot's Guide. I'll make sure you get it. We talked, I know, right? We talked a lot about parliamentary procedure being based largely on common sense and courtesy. It does seem technical because it has been necessary to develop a special vocabulary for discussing it. But if you become familiar with that vocabulary, for instance, point of order, postpone indefinitely, died on the table, or lay on the table, it becomes easier. And I'm certainly learning that it's becoming easier for me to help assist you guys. So hopefully we can all grow together in this. But they're really there to help, not hinder business. So there's some leeway with that, especially for small boards under 12 members. You may find that with regard to how the meeting is run, that strict enforcement simply doesn't work, is what Robert's Rule says. It says if you are a small board under 12 members, not all of Robert's rules may work for you. Seldovia, for instance, as a smaller board of 7, has a couple of established customs, which are acceptable but unusual. And one of the biggest ones being that debate occurs before the motion. In a larger group, the motion would be made first in order to dictate the rules of the conversation. And so that you know what you're discussing specifically. We lay it out, and it's important that on the agenda, it's laid out how the motion would be made, so the ordinance numbers put on there with what it is, resolution number, which helps guide the conversation. But if you're moving first to support or accept or oppose, then that can help really facilitate that conversation and what members want to say. But in Seldovia, the order is presentation by staff. So it would be myself or Rachel or whoever comes in to help present, then council debate, then public presentation, and then action or deliberation, which is the motion. And that is completely backwards to Robert's Rules of Order. A couple of you have discovered that recently that are newer. And it's been brought up, even by newer staff, that it's done that way. The reason why this came about when I started here, so this agenda that we talked about before is in code. Any changes that need to be made are made in code. When I started here, it would say presentation by staff, public discussion, council discussion, action. And really under a public hearing, what you would have is you'd have the staff discussion, then the public hearing would take place, the public would speak, and then the council would make potentially, that this wasn't even happening when I started here, but the council would then make a motion and then have that discussion and then the vote, right? Which is the action or disposition. The request came twofold. A lot of it was a push from a few members of the public who, with the way it was laid out, because the motion was happening last, the discussion was happening last, they would come and they would speak or choose not to speak. And then council discussion would take place and they would hear items that would happen or things that the council wanted to, they said, and they would want more information. They wanted to ask a question or be able to respond. And Seldovia is very pro-public comment and public participation. And it was creating an issue or an area of the meeting that was not being run very effectively because there is support for the public to be able to hear what the council has to say and then either respond or ask question to it. So what was happening is the public was speaking, council was speaking, then public would be given an opportunity to speak again, which is fine. That was what the direction that council and mayor chose to go in. And then council would speak and make final action. And if you weren't on council during that time, if you don't remember, that really makes for a very long meeting. So because of that, council decided to go to staff presentation, council discussion, public presentation, and then council would make their final action. With that, council doesn't have to speak during council discussion. That's your opportunity to speak in support or opposition if you should choose, but it can, staff presentation, council doesn't want to speak, that you get choose whether you do or don't. Public gets to choose whether they do or don't. And then action. I would say that if council in the future does want to change this order to be able to facilitate having the motion first, to have that direction, or even being able to have the opportunity to have a motion that you don't want to discuss it at the time, or you want to postpone it either indefinitely or to a certain time, I'd be more than happy to help you guys through that process. So as a board, that's something to definitely think through. If you'd like to try it the other way in the future, if you think that might be efficient, we can try it. But for now, that's the history. I wanted you guys to have it of why that came about and why it's on there. And for Seldovia, it's considered a custom rule and it is acceptable as a smaller board. I already mentioned the books as resource. Let me know if you want one. And the rules properly administered are there to protect the rights of the majority, minority, individual, absentee, and organization. The larger the group, the more formal the application of the rules. But even a small committee requires formality if the subject matter is controversial, which is where we would get into the 3-minute timer or, setting the ground rules beforehand, no booing, no clapping. We're going to keep everybody, to having a proper decorum because that might discourage somebody from wanting to comment. So more controversial, larger the group, the more rules are imposed, right? But for Seldovia, that is our custom rule. Any questions on that so far? No? That made sense? Okay. Basic debate decorum. We've already gone over some of this. Raise your hand or be recognized by the mayor. We don't really raise hands here, but just that recognition that comments are made through the mayor and addressed to the council, not the audience. Speak once and wait. Use facts to support your position. The mayor will strive for pros and cons. Call the question is a great one. So if the debate is just really going long and things are being repeated and you're ready to be able to vote and move on with the process, you can call the question or Actually, I'm thinking of something else. Call the question really is that you're saying I'm speaking to this topic. And if it's going off topic, calling the question, you want to get back on track, you're speaking to the topic. Let's see here. Really debate the issues, topics, not the person. You know, I like this saying a lot. Be hard on issues, soft on people. We've talked about patience, being clear with what you're having to say, so you're coming prepared, open to compromise. Oh yes, yeah, that was what call the question is. You must have on the floor in order to make a motion. So call the question is, if you want to make a motion, it's your turn to speak on the floor. You're not speaking ahead or in the middle of somebody else. Did you have a question, Jen? Okay. Do not grandstand. Remember that you do not have to respond to the public comment, but you should certainly thank them for speaking. And just overall showing respect and making sure you're abiding by council ethics. And we will discuss that here in a little bit. Work hard to avoid just some general things to think of while you're up on the council dais: negative body language, personal outrage, irrelevant interjection, personal attack, redundant information. That's a really big one. It's one of the biggest time suckers during a meeting is redundancy. So remember, what you're saying is being recorded and may be summarized in the meeting minutes. Chances are, if you've said it once, everyone has heard it, and it probably doesn't warrant being stated again. But that's your guys' debate. So, you know, it's the information that you need to share. Additionally, adversarial or chaotic meetings can kill the will of a group and result in bad decision-making. So if you're here to prove a point or make a statement, you can set it aside. Remember your modeling behavior, and that makes for a lot smoother meeting. Questions on that? No, it's basic decorum. So I'm not going to go too deep then on how a motion is introduced. I think you're all fairly familiar with that. You obtain the floor, so that's the call to questions. Raise your hand. This information really can be extremely beneficial in the future, especially if you choose to adopt a policy where the motion goes before the discussion. And that being, like we discussed, that's a great reason for that policy would be if the council wants to discuss an issue or not discuss an issue or to postpone it until the next meeting. It can be done before the discussion is even held. But for right now, really, this is fairly basic. You make the motion, you wait for a second. The main motion should state what, who, when, or where, and it should be in the affirmative. That might be one that not everybody's aware of. Motions are always supposed to be in the affirmative. So even if you're opposing something, you're going to say, you know, I move that we oppose this. And that is that way. The affirmative, that means that when people are voting in agreement with your motion, they're voting yes. But if you're saying, I move that we do not support this, that gets confusing and convoluted. Even though it's still a yes, you're yesing to, it's just, it gets a little confusing. So you want to make sure that it's in the affirmative. And we can always help script motions. That's something that we're definitely becoming more familiar with and used to. So if you ever need help with creating a motion, you could certainly reach out to staff and we'll help. Additionally, the person making the motion really should support it. You don't have to, but according to Robert's, you know, a lot of times I hear we're making the motion so that we can discuss it, right? That's why. But really in Robert's rules, it's saying if you're making a motion, you're making it because you want to discuss it, move it forward. If you don't, and nobody else wants to, that's when it dies. I don't support that. I don't want to discuss it. You don't make that motion. Nobody else makes the motion. Mayor might ask, anybody want to make a motion? Nobody does. Move on. You don't have to. So the first person really should be making that motion in support of it. the second person who's seconding it, that's not the case. That second person may be seconding it just because they're like, yeah, let's discuss this. And of course, as a main motion, it can be debated and it can be amended. Okay. Processing, the chair will then state the motion. Jeremiah is pretty good about summarizing it. Our Mayor Campbell is. And then it's time to speak to the motion. But as we've discussed before, because the discussion comes first, a lot of times that support or opposition has already been spoken. Your position's already been said. Because of that in Soldovia, not often is there discussion after a motion. And that's fine too. That's our custom. That's how we do it. But if you were following the Robert's Rules of Order, this would be where you would have that debate. And then it would go into the vote. Amending motion, I wanted to make sure this was in here because we've had this come up a lot recently. And this is a great reminder that there'll be the main motion, and then you have a subsidiary motion, which does need a second. It can be debated, it can be amended. So you can amend twice. So you do the let me see if I make sure I say this right. You have the main motion, and then you'll have your primary amendment, and then you can amend that amendment. So you have a secondary amendment to the primary amendment, and that's it. Once you've had a primary and a secondary, we're going to go through orders of precedence in a minute, ladder of precedence, but then you need to, you went up the ladder. So motion, primary, secondary, then you have to come back down the ladder to vote, secondary, primary, motion, main motion, and then, sorry, before the main motion, you can make another amendment, and you can do that as many times as you want. It's not, it sounds kind of scary saying you can only amend it twice. It's not that you can make as many amendments as you want, but each amendment should be done on its own. Does that make sense? So you have an amendment, you can have a secondary to that amendment. You vote on the secondary, you vote on the primary, and then if you want to make another amendment to that main motion, which is now either amended or not, then you can go on. And so as an example, if you say, I move to buy a new police vehicle, that's the main motion. Then you say, wait, our primary amendment is I move to amend to not exceed 36,000 and for it to be a Crown Victoria. And somebody else says, no, I move to amend that it be a Ford. Then that's your motion. So you're going to say the secondary is for it to be a Ford. People vote on that, whether they agree or disagree. Then it goes back up to that amendment, which is that it's 36,000 and be a Crown Vic. And so if Ford's passed, it's going to take the place of Crown Vic. And then if that 36 and Ford or 36 and Crown Vic passes, so you've got 36 and Ford because that's taken the place. And then if you want to make another amendment, you could, for instance, like if you wanted to say, I move that we purchase a new police vehicle, but it be in the next fiscal year and be a Ford and not exceed 36,000. So then you're making another amendment and you can make another secondary. And you can do that as many times as you want, as long as it's staying germane. That's an important piece. So as long as it's staying on the subject is you're buying a police vehicle, right? You can change prices, types, when, as long as it's a subject. It does not have to have the same intent. So you can make that amendment to say, I move that we do not, or, I move that, I move that we do not purchase a vehicle. But that you wouldn't want to do that one specific. I need to think of a better example because you would just vote no on it. But you can change the intent of the motion as long as it's germane to the subject. I'll come up with a better example in a minute. Does that make sense so far? Yeah, move that he takes the trash truck. You're still discussing the police vehicle, but the intent is you're no longer buying one, right? Yeah, that's a great example. Okay. And here it's just showing that process. But here's where it gets really great. And we printed and laminated these so you can also include them. Hopefully they're helpful in your code of ordinances, and I'll leave one in here to view. But this is a great reminder for those motions. If you don't want to have a discussion or you want to do something else besides just pass the motion and be done, if there's more business to be conducted with that motion, there is a precedence of motions. And you'll see the arrows going up on the left-hand side and coming down on the right-hand side, because that's your ladder. So you go up the ladder, and then whatever goes up has to come back down. So you have your main motion, or postpone indefinitely if you don't want to discuss it. You can amend it then, so on and so forth, up. The importance of this is because in Robert's rules, if you go up, you can't come back down until you've cleared that business. And some things like postpone indefinitely, if you go up and you postpone indefinitely, you can't keep going up. You're done. It goes back down, right? So if you go up and you make an amendment and you're in the middle of amendment, you have to clear that before you can come back down and postpone it. It's a lot, and I can go more in depth into it if you want, but really it's a great guide that as you make these motions, if you get to refer to a committee, you can't go back down until you've done that vote. Does that make sense? Yes. Ma'am. Can you amend your own motion? Yes, absolutely. Any other questions? Yeah, it's a good tool, and it's something that we're gonna work on together, but I like that. You can't come back down, or if you go up, you have to come back down. And these I'll probably go through pretty quickly because, well, we've got an hour, but just, you also have your motion sheet that's been laminated, your motion classifications. Hopefully you guys all still have this in your code book, but talked about main motion, subsidiary motion, privilege motion, incidental motion, and what those are. And just so briefly, the flying motions, point of order, point of information, question of privilege. A lot of times these can be done informally, and you don't need a Mr. Mayor, I move for a point of order, right? They don't require a second. It's you're asking a question of the meeting. So you would say, Mr. Mayor, point of order. And then he would say, state your point. And then once your point is made, the chair would rule on that, what you've stated. Point of info is simply a request for information, not a parliamentary nature. So, I need more information on this lease. I need more information on, whatever it's got to be a simple request though. So I'm trying to think of what that would be, but what's the URL? There you go. That's what it is. What's the URL? How do I sign into this meeting? That kind of a general knowledge, general information. Question of privilege would be like, I'm cold, we need to turn up the heat. Is a really good one. And like I said, they don't require a second, they don't require a debate. They're just a great way. If you're trying to get the mayor's attention, council's attention, you need something done. You need information, you need a topic to go back to where it's supposed to be. Those are your flying motions, which aren't necessarily a motion. Lay on the table is the most misunderstood motion. And one thing I'd like to point out is because it's the most misunderstood, it's also the most used. It really is temporary. That's the key of the motion. When you're laying something on the table, you're laying it on my table. You're saying, I'm going to lay this on the table because we're going to talk about something else first. And then you have to pick it back up off the table. So key here, if you postpone something, it just goes on to the next agenda. And then at the next agenda, it picks up where you left off. If you lay something on the table, you also have to make a motion to bring it off the table. So you've moved to lay it on the clerk's table. It's done. You're moving on to the next item. You want to talk about it again, you have to move to pick it up from the table. If it goes to the next meeting, which it can only go to the next meeting, after that it's done, you then still have to make that motion to pick it up off of the table. You've laid it there, you have to take it off. A lot of people use this to kill a motion. Really, that's not what it's meant to do. It's just meant to set it aside so you can talk about something more pressing or something else that needs to happen. If you want to kill something, postpone indefinitely is the proper motion. It also is not debatable. So it requires a second, no discussion on it, vote. If it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, then you go back to the discussion. We already discussed postpone indefinitely, and this is used to kill a motion. So you made the motion. We go back to the precedents, the ladder. You've made the motion. Wait, I don't want to discuss this motion. We don't even want to approve this motion. We're going to postpone indefinitely. It's done. Unless somebody from the council decides to bring it back in the future. This one can be debated and also requires a second. Postpone to a certain time. We've seen this happen where you need more information. Like, hey, you're being asked to pass a resolution to pass for working in a partnership for a water and sewer ArcGIS program. We need more information. So you're going to postpone it till the next meeting. Fairly simple. It can be amended. It does require a majority. It's debatable, but the debate is limited to its merits, and it can be reconsidered. And we'll get into that next. So those are the bring back motions: reconsider, resend, and amend something previously adopted. We've had these questions come up recently, and so it helps just to kind of go over what they are. Reconsider wins the award for the most challenging, and many cities have their own specific rules to reconsideration. Oh my goodness, some of the rules for reconsideration are just, I mean, it just depends. Juneau has its own way of dealing with this motion, but we're just dealing with Robert's rules. And for this, it means you have to be, if you want something to be reconsidered, you have the next day after the meeting. You can do it during the meeting. You can do it the following day. You can call me up or city manager up on the phone and say, man, that thing I voted on last night, I do not think I should have voted on that. I want to reconsider it. And we'll issue a notice. We'll help you issue a notice saying that this item needs to be reconsidered, as long as, here's the key, whatever it is that you voted on hasn't already taken place. If you voted on approving a contract, next morning, staff gets into the office, they call, approve the contract, sign it off, send it off, and then at the end of the day, 5 o'clock, you say, ooh, I should have changed that. Well, you're a little bit late. That's why you've got a day. But a contract hasn't been set off. It's not done. You've decided you do not really want to approve it. You can call and we can issue that reconsideration. The only catch is you have to be on the prevailing side. So, for instance, contract for a new grader. You have, maybe that's not a good one. New police truck. We'll go back to that. New police truck. 4 of you vote yes. 2 say no. The next day, one of you, Jen and George, have said, no way, we don't want a new police truck. We're voting no. And Jen calls me up the next day and says, I want to reconsider that. I want to vote yes. Or I want to reconsider that. I want that to be reconsidered. It shouldn't have passed. I'm sorry, Jen. It did pass. 4 of your counterparts said yes. But Bobby calls up and says, I voted yes on that and I shouldn't have. I don't think it should have passed. Well, in that instance, that's a reconsideration. And as long as we haven't put through the contract, we'll say, okay, I hear what you're saying. We'll put it back to council at the next meeting. So it comes back up as a reconsideration of that contract or lease at the next meeting. And Bobby says, you know what? I really should have voted yes. I changed my mind. She was allowed to do that too. It's a hard one. It's not one we do very often. And it's definitely very challenging. But hopefully that gives you guys an idea of what that means.
Are we talking business day?
Yeah.
Or can I text you at 11 o'clock at night and be like, whoa, changed my mind?
Yeah, pretty much by 5 p.m. of the next day, let us know, because at the end of that business day, it's done. It's just not reasonable after that. Rescind is used to cancel something that was done at the previous meeting. So instead of reconsidering a motion, rescind is when you've changed your minds or circumstances has changed. Life happens. But if it's the same thing, if it's a contract or something that's already gone through, you cannot rescind it if it's already happened. If it's already been, the bid's already been awarded, the money's already been spent, it's too late. And I think we'll go into that a little more in depth here in a minute. And then there's amend something previously adopted, which is very similar to rescind and this is not one that you would use very often. In fact, I can't think of any instances where it's been used. But, say you have moved to buy that new police truck and you've moved and you're going to spend $42,000 on it. And it turns out it's just like not in the budget and it's not going to happen. And you want to come back and you want to amend it. It's already been adopted to be a different amount. You can do that, but really it's more effective if just new legislation comes forward that says, we're going to buy this truck for this, right? And it's a new piece. You're starting on kind of all over just with what you want in it, because it's these three really can be very challenging. And that new legislation helps show that transition and helps have that paper trail. Like I said, we're going a little bit more into reconsideration. We've talked about it. Needs to be a member on the prevailing side. Must be given only at the meeting at which the action to be reconsidered was taken, and this says at the next regular meeting, but that's Valdez's for Robert's rules, because we don't have that. It's has to be the next day. Notice of reconsideration expires unless it's acted upon prior to the adjournment of the next regular meeting. It requires a second in order to reconsider. So we would give that motion, and then at that next meeting, it would come up and Bobby would say, I wanted to reconsider this. She makes her motion. Somebody seconds it. Then it goes back to where the debate was before the vote. And you can debate it all over again, but it's the same motion. And then you re-vote. But as I said, Bobby says, I wanted to reconsider this, but I've thought about it and I really haven't. Then you move on. The discussion doesn't have to happen. And that's okay. If the motion fails, if she does move to reconsider, there is a second, debate happens, and then the vote happens and it's failed, then that motion stands the way it was previously. You guys with me so far? Okay. Rescind. Again, can't do it with something that's already been done. It's very similar to reconsideration, but reconsideration, I guess the way you can look at that is reconsideration is of your individual vote, whereas rescind is like the whole thing. We passed this thing and we shouldn't have, like. So if there was like an emergency, like if, okay, say we agreed to purchase something, purchase a building, purchase a piece of land, right? The council said, we're gonna purchase this land. We've all agreed to it. And then there's a natural disaster, earthquake, fire, flood, whatever. Funds just go out the window, right? And then you wanted to, so then you don't have, no longer is purchasing that piece of land on the table. As a council, you would need to rescind that piece of legislation supporting whatever purchase it is you were making because there's no longer funds for it. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. And if so, then if that rescind is brought up at the next meeting, you know, saying we want to rescind this, if it passes, then you would make a motion in the direction that you wanted it to go in. If there was further direction there, like we don't want to purchase this land now, but we do want to reconsider this in a year. Something previously adopted, like I said, it's really similar to rescind. You must state your change in the motion similar to any amendment. So I moved to amend whatever that motion legislation was as previously adopted to now state whatever it is you want it to state now. But in those cases, often just write a new piece of legislation. Call for the previous question, stop debate. To stop debate immediately and take a vote. So I move the previous question. We don't want to talk about this anymore. We're done. It's been a long. You can hear that's done formally or informally. Some people will just say question. That's not formal. That's, you should really call for the question would be the correct terminology for that is the proper form. There should be a second, and then immediately there's a vote on it because you're taking the rights away of your other council members. If you call the question, you're saying, I don't want to talk about this anymore. We're done. So you need a second, and then it has to be voted on. And if the majority says, okay, we're done talking about it, then that vote, roll call vote is required. And you're done talking about it. But that roll call vote on the call of question happens right away because that's when your council can say, no, we're still talking about this. You might have called the question, but we're voting no. We want to continue discussing. And because of that, because it's limited discussion, here's one where it doesn't need a quorum of 4. It just needs 2/3 to pass, which typically would be 4. But if you only have 4, you know, you would need 3. And then, like I said, if it passed, then you would vote on it immediately. Normally, this is done more of an informal sense where the mayor asks if there's any objections to calling the question. Oh, that's what they're saying. But really, it's not debatable. Do you guys have any questions on that? I'll go back to that. No, we haven't really seen that happen, but you can. These are other things just to consider in debate closed. You know, of course, we already talked about you need a quorum of 4. If you have a conflict of interest, you need to be recused. Under Robert's rules, each member should vote unless you're accused. You should not abstain because that's your duty on the council is to put a voice towards the vote. A vote tie fails unless it's broken by the mayor, but again, they do not have to vote. No debate is allowed during voting. So you shouldn't say, I'm voting yes, but only because John voted yes. It's just a yes or a no. Changing your vote. If a member wishes to change their vote, it is allowed, but it must take place before the results of the vote are called. So we say roll call vote, Sweat, Kennedy, Swick, Nathan, and then Swick says, wait, I want to change my vote. And we haven't said, the mayor hasn't said, motion passes, or 6-1 or 5-1 motion passes. She can still change it, but that's a really quick time period. And then, of course, types of votes. We discussed roll call votes are required during hybrid virtual meetings. But if we ever went back to where we were having non-hybrid meetings and everybody was meeting in person, that could go back to a general consent to vote, which is just a vote of no objection. We doing okay? Any questions? No? Conflict of interest policy. So we have this in 2 places now. It's in the code, Sylvia Municipal Code 2.04090, City Council Conflict of Interest. And here it says any member of the City Council having a substantial financial interest in an official action shall declare such substantial financial interest and ask to be excused from a vote. We also have in your packet a policy that was recently passed. And because we needed a more substantial conflict of interest policy in order to obtain American Rescue Plan Act funds. And the more substantial one includes city employees, officials, agents of the city, and it's just a little bit more in depth. And I'm not going to go into it unless you guys really want to discuss it more. But all elected officials fill out a financial disclosure form before they serve, and that's per a resolution in the code. And then the code, it's very basic and it's similar to Alaska statutes, and just that it's where does it say it? That a municipal employer official other than a member of, okay, no, not that one. A substantial, just declare a substantial financial interest. And that's not, there's no definition of what a substantial financial interest is. So really it's a matter of the community to be able to consider what the court would consider substantial. What does that mean? And then really ethics, so the last part of this section, service in a public office or elected position is a public trust. Staff and elected officials may not use their positions for personal gain or to give an unwarranted benefit or treatment to any person. And then there's some examples here, using your official position to secure employment or contracts, accept compensation in exchange for voting or performing in a certain way, take or withhold official action on a matter in which they have a personal or financial interest, coerce city staff for their personal or financial benefit, influence or demand administration, hire or fire employees based on individual preference, disclose city business information in order to receive personal or financial benefit. And then, of course, the receiving gifts of any kind from a person doing business or likely to do business with the city. But however, ceremonial gifts or of a nominal value are not accepted, or that are not accepted for a corrupt purpose are okay. That reads weird. You want to speak a little bit more on this, Miss City Manager?
You bet. So the idea is that you as elected officials, perhaps you're going to, like 2 of you are going to go to the city of Homer to strengthen our relationship with our neighboring first-class city. And they decide to give each council member, each of those 2 council members, a gift certificate for $20 to go get some coffee as part of like, thank you for coming over to our community. That would be okay. Because it's nominal. They're not doing it to corrupt your position and get you to vote a particular way here at the city of Soldovia. However, let's say an engineer comes to town and he knows that you serve on the council, and perhaps you've even hired this engineer to do work on your house. They say, I would give you $5,000 off of this work that you've asked me to do if you vote for me to be the engineer that provides the consultation services for the city's water treatment plant. That would be a huge red flag. So there's disclosures at the legislative level for lobbyists. So lobbyists have to keep logs of how they take people out to dinner, how much money they give to elected officials for certain actions. So it's just, you always want to be really conscientious when someone is giving you a gift, what the intentions might be. And so on the bottom of this slide, it's, if you ever feel like there's a time in which your ethics or something may be compromising your position as an elected official, please let me know and we can look into it further just to make sure that nothing would compromise the public's trust in your ability to serve in your role. And then I take a code of ethics through my professional organization. And so, for example, like I don't vote in our local elections. I stay neutral to serve the council most effectively. And I'm happy to provide the council with those code of ethics if you'd like to see. But overall, we just want to make sure that the public trusts in your ability to serve and doesn't think there's anything going on to sway your opinion.
Okay, any questions so far? We're really getting through it. Any questions so far? We're really getting through it, guys. There's only a little bit left, but I did have it in here. If you guys needed a quick break, we could. Otherwise, I think it's only a couple more slides we want to push through. Okay.
Yeah, let's just push through.
Okay, here we go. So next we had on the agenda that we were going to go through our Philadelphia Municipal Code a little bit and budget. And this is just a really it's just a debrief of these pieces of these documents that really help assist us in our capacity as governmental officials. And, the Code of Ordinances is an essential part of the governmental function. It provides both local governments and citizens with a body of current enforceable laws in a way that makes the code easy to use and reference. And this is just a picture here of our Code of Ordinances from our website. We update this annually. As the clerk, that's another one of my duties, is to go in to codify the code. And I try to do this every year because when I started here, it was like 5 years behind, and that was a lot of work. But all the legislation that you've passed for that year, I'll update, and then I bring it to council for your guys' approval as an update. And then we update it on the website. Everybody gets copies for their books. So everybody should be the most up to date as since the most recent recodification. And you'll see on both the website and in your books, it'll say when the last recodification happened for this year. It happened in September, end of September. And I put the website on here because that's the most useful place to see the ordinances that have not yet been codified, because we've done it to a certain point. Legislation's still happening. Things are still being passed. So in this case, Philadelphia Municipal Code 2.52.020 types of employment is not going to be up to date in your book, and it's not going to be up to date in Title II, but that's the ordinance there with the up-to-date legislation that's been passed. And when I do the recodification next year, it'll be incorporated in. The Code of Ordinances not only is in the book and it's on the website, but it's also on your tablets. So the most recent version, you guys should all have it in your Adobe under your shared drive. If you need help getting and accessing that, it's there. Also, the comprehensive plan, I want to point that out. It's in there. And I know we've been having discussions on it lately. You should also have a paper copy. If you do not, I have a couple here, or I can get you one. Let me know. There's one on that desk, one here. Certainly want you guys to have access to the comprehensive plan, and it's on the website. Let's see.
And just to add to that, so anytime staff makes a decision or is looking at like a request a constituent is made, we look to the code. So it's not like we make things up out of thin air. We follow Seldovia Municipal Code to ensure that whatever decisions are coming out of administration or whatever recommendations we're putting before the council, it's come with justification from our Seldovia Municipal Code. And so we'll usually even cite the code so that people can see that we're following the direction that's been provided by past council, as well as legislation that's changing our current code to make decisions.
Yes, and that's a big reason why we do have ordinances, is because codes regularly need to be updated. They regularly need to be maintained. These ordinances in our municipal code, some of them can be fairly outdated because it's a lot of work to maintain and update the codes. Even the veto one, which was one of the ones that hasn't been codified yet, I believe, on a website. We came across that just in the last couple months, where the veto the mayor wanted to express his right and his power to have a veto, and the code wasn't clear and was not contradictory to the Alaska statutes, but just wasn't as clearly defined as Alaska statutes. It left some openings there that was really open to suggestion, or not suggestion, but open to interpretation, I should say. And so that's why we do it. That's why we update. That's why we bring it forward. And a lot of times you'll see those from the city clerk or the city manager, but they can certainly be from you guys too. If you see something outdated, let us know. So sponsoring an ordinance or resolution, really, this is just to empower you guys to be able to make that recommendation, to say, I want an ordinance to change this. And there's two types of ordinances. There's a code or non-code ordinance. Really, and going back to the basics, an ordinance is a law enacted by local government and establishes the rules for the operation of local government or provides rules and regulations governing public activity. So the code is anything that's going to go in your code, and non-code are the items that do not, but are still a law. Your budget is a non-code ordinance. Changes every year. It's still a law. It's just not in your code book, and it changes yearly. Emergency ordinances are a form of a non-code ordinance. So a non-code ordinance, another way to put that is a non-code ordinance is temporary and accomplishes a single action, whereas a code ordinance is permanent and general in nature. And it should state that when they're introduced. So an emergency ordinance is also a form of a non-code ordinance. And state law allows municipalities to approve emergency ordinances and bypass the normal procedures for enacting an ordinance, which is a two meeting reading. So you introduce it, and then you have another meeting for a public hearing. That's state law for enacting an ordinance. But sometimes there's an emergency and you need to get whatever, you need to amend the budget. You need to approve masks or approve appropriation of funds. I don't think that's a good example. I'll jump back that. But you need a quick decision made. So it's one hearing and it can only last up to 60 days. And then you can renew it. 60 days. And then you can renew it. But it must be serious enough to justify immediate action. And it must not be used to levy taxes, to grant, renew, or extend a franchise, or to regulate public utility rates. Can't say we're going to raise the sewer and water and sewer for the summer. We need it now. You have to have you can raise the rates as part of the fee schedule, but it has to follow the public hearing process and have a 2 meeting public hearing. Resolution is an official expression of the opinion or will of the legislative body. And they're not laws. It's you're expressing your opinion. But under some extent, circumstances, it can have that effect of a law. And for us, that's like when you, for instance, adopt a policy. We use resolutions to adopt policy like this conflict of interest. So the resolution itself is not a law, but it kind of acts as it because it's having that effect. You're putting a policy in place. And as previously mentioned, the mayor or other city council member, city clerk, city attorney, or city manager may sponsor an ordinance for introduction or resolution for adoption. And such resolution or ordinance shall be placed on the agenda of the regular city council I'm like reading too fast. Shall be placed on the agenda of the regular city council meeting requested by the sponsor. And we really, strongly want to support and encourage and empower you guys to be able to write legislation or help write legislation. I will write it for you if you tell me what it is you want to say. But that is a big piece of what you're doing and who you are up here. And I, just can't express that enough, that if you need help going through the process, if there's something you want to say, that's our job, is to be here to support you in saying it. And I hope, that we've been facilitating that to this point and that we can continue to facilitate that. Just let us know, reach out. And if you want to write it yourself, we can proofread, help, research, do any things that will help make that happen. But really, that gives you authorship and ownership. And then you discuss it on the agenda, you make the motion to approve it, it puts it into your hands. And it can have multiple authors. You can have a co-sponsor. Two of you can get together and write it. And you can both be the author, or you can even be a co-sponsor in just that you want to support it. So John writes an ordinance. Jen says, that's a great idea. You can put my name on there showing my support. And then you're co-sponsors. Or you write it together. And we can help you through any of those steps. We're more than happy to do that. Any questions? No? Okay.
Heidi,
Yes.
I have a clarification question.
Yeah.
Would that be restricted to 2 sponsors, or would it be ethical to have 2 or more, up to 3 sponsors or 4 sponsors?
Yeah, you could have more sponsors, but you have to watch out that that's
what I'm wondering.
Yeah, that's
what I'm
tricky.
wondering.
Yeah, that's tricky. So if you're just signing on to say you support something, then
Seems like it'd be appropriate to just wait till the vote to garner more support on a subject, right?
Or even have a work session
Okay.
to discuss it and create it. You can develop that piece of legislation in a work session together. There's ways that we can notice it so that you guys can work together. But yes, you do want to watch out for OMA with that.
Okay, copy that. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. And then budget. This has just come up recently, and I think that there's always confusion around it. Probably not so much on the council, but certainly I do hear in the community. The city of Seldovia operates on a July 1, June 30th fiscal year budget, and that's same as the state of Alaska. So currently, even though it's 2021, we're in fiscal year 2022. And we're going to begin preparing the FY23 budget at the beginning of next year. So this process typically starts in January and usually begins with the city manager. City manager, that's one of their tasks, is to prepare and present a budget to you guys to pass, to support and adopt, right? So January, typically they would sit down with the department staff and identify needs for the upcoming fiscal year, and then that would be followed by multiple work sessions in order to garner council and public input, especially if there are significant changes. This was kind of a little bit backwards last year because we did have new administration and our budget went through a complete revamp. So now our budget is performance-based and it shows multiple years performance measures in each department. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it. I should have brought an example. I'm going to make a note to do that at the next meeting next year. But it is online and we do have it at the city office, and it has the narrative of each department, where they've been, where they want to go, and then those performance measures. So that starts in January. February, March, more starts coming into the play with city council, with public, with getting that input, getting that buy-in. And we've seen a lot of changes in the past, in the recent history, that I just wanted to point out, which includes utility rates being raised over a succession of years after a long stagnant period where there were no rate increases. The simplification of utility rates into a 4 or 5 class rate structure, the removal of the utility maintenance fee, which was a lesser rate for having your water shut off, the inclusion of late fees for individuals who are late and paying either a harbor or utility bill, and then that budget format, which I just discussed, and was just updated to tell more of a story. As I said, the city manager presents that budget. And per Seldovia Municipal Code, Title 3, Chapter 1, Section 020, let me read it here. The city manager shall present to the council a budget proposal for the next fiscal year of the city during or prior to the 8-week period preceding the first day of fiscal year. So she needs to present it to you before 8 weeks before June 30th, before July 1st, in essence, right? So you've got June, May. She needs to be presented in the beginning of May. And then such budget proposal shall set forth the city manager's recommendation for an analysis of the anticipated income and expenditures of the city during the next fiscal year, together with figures showing the estimated corresponding amounts for the current year and the previous year. Proposed expenditures set forth in the budget proposal shall not exceed revenues of the city. So where's that money coming from? That's a big task on the city manager's shoulders. But unencumbered funds remaining at the end of the current fiscal year may be reallocated for purposes set forth in the budget proposal. So that's a lot of times where that ends up. It's just, it switches between accounts. The council should adopt, that budget should be adopted not less than 20 days prior to the end of fiscal year. Really, by the end of May, we try to accomplish that because June's the last month. And by the second meeting in June, you've waited too late. The fee schedule, we've discussed utility rate changes. And that is also administration fees, rates, copies, water, tokens. Well, that's part of water. Trying to think, what else do we do? The harbor rates, water, sewer, utility, administration. So that's copies and emails, licensing. That's a big part of it. Building license administration, business license administration, all of those things is part of the fee schedule. And that is passed an accompaniment of the budget, because those are the rates that are used to make, the budget. They help make up what those revenues are going to be. And also additionally with that is the mill rate. And a mill rate is simply 1/1000th of a dollar. So it represents $1 of tax for each $1,000 of taxable assessed value. This is a big issue. We have the highest mill rate in the borough, and very few properties, and there's a lot of exemptions. And as we saw last year, the mill rate, the amount of money estimated, revenue estimated for the city that the city was going to gain was decreased from the prior year. And that can happen for a number of reasons, but a lot of times it has to do back with those exemptions, right? So the other big deal about it is that the city has to pass it. In the past, we thought if the city didn't pass a mill rate, it would just roll over and the city would stay at a mill rate. We discovered last year when we had to ask for an extension because the mill rate is due to the borough by June 15th, that if the city does not pass the mill rate, even if it's the same every year, then it's automatically a zero because the borough can't step in and say, this is what the city hasn't done anything, so this is what the city is charging. That's a big responsibility. You have to pass the mill rate every year, even if it's staying the same by June 15th. So that goes along with the budget. And then amendments can be made both to the budget and fee schedule. And really, we're seeing that happen as the best practice for the city manager and finance officer to examine that budget halfway through the year. We did that last year. I think we've done it in some prior years, but if you wait until the end of your budget to make your budget amendments, it can be harder to track. It's just not as easy as if you look through it mid-year and make those adjustments to know where you're at. So it's a really good practice. And then you can make them at the end too, if you need, but it'd be nice to be in a perfect world where our budget was passed and that's what we spent and that's what it was at the end of the year. And I think maybe eventually we'll get closer. It seems like we're getting closer every year, but having those mid-year adjustments, that's a fairly regular practice for municipalities because things come up. Roofs need fixed. And then the council priorities. Seldovia City Council sets a list of high, medium, and low priorities. This was the first time this happened was last year. That was extremely beneficial to city staff. And I hope it was beneficial to council because that really was a guiding tool for the budget process and throughout the year of like, yes, council wants us to focus on these issues. So this is where we're going to focus on spending these funds and the projects that we're going to put emphasis on and prioritize through our time. So that we're going to look to have that meeting on the 6th, similar to today's. It'll be an afternoon retreat and it'll talk about last year's council priorities and it'll help council hopefully establish next year's. And we'll use that as a tool to guide us through. So I'm sorry that there's these afternoon meetings at the end of the year, but we're only having one real meeting a month. So hopefully that helps for these last 2 months because I'm hoping they're really beneficial tools to help move us forward and be on the same page. And then the audit happens annually and is also, part of the budget because you need to know where you've been to know where you're going. And it's also performed annually because it helps us secure certain types of funding, such as the community assistance program. You have to have an audit in order to get those funds. The audit is presented to council for approval and also, serves as a guide for city budgeting and finances. This year's audit, we typically try to have the audit in the few months following the end of the fiscal year. So that's June 30th. But this year, due to some preparation and the city managers discussed this with the council prior, but it was put off for a few months just to make sure that we're fully prepared and able to present the best audit that we can. So it's scheduled now for the first week of January. Questions on the budget? Yes.
The audit.
Yes.
Now that we are prepared and we know what's coming, is the cost of this going to decrease a little bit?
That's a big part of the reason why the audit was scheduled out is because it gets more expensive. The more times you have to have them visit, or if they even just show up and they can't complete it in their time, which we've seen happen over the last couple of years, that costs more. So, and I'm sure the city manager can speak more to it, but we're trying to limit the expense and be able to do it in a timely manner.
And I would just add, Councilmember Nathan, that it's evermore the reason why we should maintain staff and have consistency in staff and limit turnover, because having a new finance officer in addition to a pandemic made the FY20 audit difficult. And then when our auditors were getting ready to come here, they discovered that our books were not ready yet. And so they advised that we hire an accounting firm that would still keep us within what we budgeted for FY21 or FY22's budget. We budgeted about $30,000. So by hiring that auditing firm, accounting firm, we'd still stay underneath that cap, because in previous years we wouldn't do that. And then our auditors would have to come back and forth, and that was more expensive. So to answer your question in a long way, yes, by keeping the same staff, and keeping institutional knowledge, and then making sure that our books are ready in time before the auditors do their site visit, we will save money in the long run.
Okay. And one other thing about the budget, have we received all of the sales tax, online sales revenue, or is that paid once a year or quarterly, or how does that work?
I want to say we receive that monthly.
We do. We receive that monthly.
Okay. Thank you.
And then, I gotta stop doing that. Nope. Well, I had notes here, but I can't see them all of a sudden. There we go. It was on that, but I don't know. So really, I hate to end it on the budget note. I was thinking about that when I was looking at it this morning. I was like, we got to have a better ending. And so for next year, I'm going to try to end it on something softer. But I really do hope that this is beneficial. I really am looking back for feedback. I'm really looking for feedback, because I don't want you guys to sit here for 3 hours and have it not mean anything. So if there's more information that you want on particular topics or less, but I hope that it's a great refresher, and oh yeah, that's why we're doing and what we're doing. And really just a huge thank you for stepping up to serve in your guys' voluntary capacity as elected officials. We've tried to emphasize earlier, we're here to support you, and together we work as a team to be the most effective and efficient to provide the best services to the community that we can. So like I said, let us know if there are ways we can help support you better in your role. And I realize that it's not often glamorous, but it is very important. So hopefully together we can make a difference.
Thank you, City Clerk, for making an excellent annual council training opportunity. There's additional resources that we've compiled if you want to dive in deep. A primer provided by the state of Alaska on being a council member, being a mayor, more good information. And this PowerPoint presentation will be put online. So if you want to review it, it'll be on the FY22 council agenda webpage. And then I just wanted to add a couple things. You do represent the city, both on your own time, your personal time, as well as when you're here in this meeting. So I wanted to let you know that you do have insurance, public officials liability insurance provided by the city, because you could be subject to a lawsuit, either as an entire body or as an individual member. So that's why it is so important to act with integrity, professionalism in this role. There could be opportunities where someone tries to grab your goat. And so you just have to think in every decision that you make that you're here to serve the best interest of the city. And so you make a decision as a body. So it takes 4 of you to do anything. And you never just represent yourselves, so to speak. You represent the constituents that elected you. So if you look at our the staff hierarchy chart and the budget, before the council, it's actually the citizens of Soldovia that we are here to serve in the best way possible. And as the city clerk said, we are, of course, are here to support you. We work together as a team here to make you look good, give you the information that you need. And then, of course, you join the lineage of many other people in the community that have made the city what it is today. And so what we have in the past, that's not just the responsibility of the city manager or the council or the public. It is everyone that's come together to make the city what it is today. And so know that going forward, there could be opportunities where people might want to throw one person under the bus, but it is a joint effort in making the city function and run as it is. And something I just also wanted to share is I want to be able as administration to provide you guys the information that keeps you more at a bird's eye level of things, because I noticed in certain council meetings, council would be talking about administrative duties more than policy. And so there's this very distinct line that you guys set policy that then directs how staff perform. And I want to keep you in that arena rather than, not that it's necessarily a waste of time, but you have so much important policy work to do that, like, administrative tasks. And just to give an example of, where a trash can is placed, that's more of an administrative function versus like policy on how to mitigate human bear conflict over trash management. That's more in the council arena, if that makes sense. So I want staff to give you guys as much information to keep you in the arena. And then as the city clerk mentioned, we're going to have a retreat December 6th. You're going to be setting the priorities for the next year. And I'm also going to be asking you guys to set the 5 top values for the city of Soldovia. We have a mission statement. We don't have key values that I think that we should be promoting to the community to say, like, in addition to our mission statement, our priorities, these are the 5 values that we uphold. So you'll see other cities say a value to integrity, a value to maintaining trust, providing the best customer service possible. So just, as you're preparing for the council retreat, think about some values that would be important, that would represent our community. And I think those are just the items that I wanted to touch on. And we're here, of course, to answer any questions you may have. And thank you so much for making the time, both virtually as well as in person.
Great. Thank you very much for a great presentation, Madam Clerk, and thank you, City Manager. At this point, we'll go to item C if we have anybody in the audience for comments.
I'm not seeing anybody at this time, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. We'll go on to item D, and that's adjournment. Also, our next regular meeting is going to be Monday, December 13th at 6 p.m. So if we need a motion. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, we don't need a motion. It's a work session, but if I may, so we've touched on the city council retreat for December 6th, but we're not having a regular council meeting tonight, which is what would be scheduled. Instead, next week, we're hoping at the regular 6 p.m. time to have that work session on Jackloth and potentially, we haven't discussed it further if we'll touch on AMLIP or not, but having that bigger discussion because we know it's important and you guys wanted to have it come up sooner than later. So hopefully everybody's available for that next week at 6, next Monday.
Patty, what day is that?
Monday, November 29th, 6 p.m.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your great presentation. And I thank the council for their time also.
Oh, and Councilmember Rojas, I meant to address this too. In your packet is a list of questions for council to think through when you make decisions. I don't know what page it is in the packet. It's the page 10.
Page 10.
So it's just something for you to review as well. Like when you're coming up with any decision, you can vet it through these questions to help with your decision making. Sorry, that's it. I promise that's it.
Okay. Oh, that's fine. Was that sent out as an email, Madam Clerk?
It is in the packet and I'm realizing that I did not send that to you as an email. I apologize. It is on the website. We have it in chambers. I will send it to you right now, as well as the rest of these references that were mentioned. We have them all. So if you need any of them, let me know.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night. Thank